to session 7. Welcome to session 7 of Living is Dying. My name is Sering. We begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and other lands and recognise their connection to land, water and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. This session begins with Chant Om Mani Padme Hum, and I'll read what Rinpoche has to say. I think Jakob is going to screen share the text. The ideal preparation for death is to study all Buddha's teachings about refuge, bodhicitta, and dependent arising in great detail. Unfortunately, most modern people don't have time to study. So what can you do? You can chant Om Mani Padme Hum. And for those of you who are more familiar with Chinese Buddhist tradition, I've invited my friend Winnie to chant in Cantonese and Mandarin. Would you like to unmute yourself, Winnie?
I have, Sering, thank you. Namo Guan Shi Yin Pusa. Namo Guan Shi Yin Pusa. Namo Guan Shi Yin Pusa. And in Cantonese, Namo Gun Sayam Pusa. Namo Gun Sayam Pusa. Namo Gun Sayam Pusa.
Thank you, Winnie. Or if you prefer a Japanese Buddhist tradition, Akiko is here from Japan to chant for us.
Om Alokia Swaha. Om Alolikia Swaha. Om Alolikia Swaha.
Thank you, Akiko. And if you are more drawn to the Thai Theravada tradition, you could chant Buddho, Buddho, Buddho. Whether you're a Buddhist or not, the moment of death itself is crucial. This is when you'll need to do the simplest and most powerful of practices, which is to chant Om Mani Padme Hum. I now invite Janchup, our SIA pastoral carer, to talk about how chanting Om Mani Padme Hum is helpful for not only for Buddhists, but in many situations with both people and animals. Jakob, could you please screen spotlight Janchup?
Hello. Om Mani Padme Hum is the Tibetan or it's Sanskrit chant that we do. It's the heart essence of Shinrazik, or other words, Avalokiteshvara in Sanskrit, and also known as the wish-fulfilling jewel. And Shinrazik is the embodiment of compassion. And obviously there are many different forms of Shinrazik and perhaps even different names, like I know of one of Kuan Yin, and there are many others. There's the 1,000-armed Shinrazik, 4-armed Shinrazik, red Shinrazik, and the common Shinrazik is the 4-armed Shinrazik that the Tibetan people resonate in Tibet. It's chanted all the time. There are stories of Lama Zopa's mother who all she did was chant Mani Padme Hum. And it's often done during a time where people can just go for a walk, and they don't necessarily have to be sitting anywhere. It's something that just comes to the heart in order to remember, in order to be guided by this compassion. This mantra sits in the heart of Shinrayzik. I'll just give a little bit of an idea of what Shinrayzik, the form Shinrayzik's qualities are like and how one visualize. It's basically Shinrayzik on a beautiful lotus and moon seat, and then on the lotus, Shinrayzik manifests with a crossed leg Vajra posture and has 4 arms. In one hand, he holds a crystal mala, in the other, a blue kamala flower, and the 2 center hands, the 2 hands come to the Dalai Lama as a manifestation of Shinrayzik. So he's the embodiment of those qualities that we're about to hear a little bit about. Shinrayzik is ultimate compassion, great compassion. It's unobstructed. And when we say the mantra, basically what we're doing is remembering the compassion and remembering those qualities. So for someone who isn't necessarily a Buddhist, they can still relate to this because it's a universal thing of love and compassion, and ultimate unstained compassion, I think, is something that many cultures and many traditions uphold as something very precious in our human existence. Basically, it's our human nature. It's natural to us if we can open ourselves up and allow the mantra to do its blessing. It will bestow endless amounts of blessing. It's so potent. Just by hearing the mantra will bring benefit. By chanting the mantra will bring great benefit. And singing the mantra will bring benefit. So if others hear the mantra, they also gain a lot of benefit, and especially for animals, for our pets, and for animals that we see in the street or come across. It's good to, particularly if you've done some practice on this mantra, to just think of loving kindness and think of being close to that animal and making wishes for that animal to take rebirth into a situation where they meet with the Dharma and say the mantra, so that the animal can hear it. One time we were in Lismore and we were driving through the street, and I happened to be very fortunate to be with Jig Mackenzie Rinpoche, and he said, roll down the window, and some people were walking across the crossing, and he said, okay, so put yourself out and call out, Om Mani Padme Hum. And I did that, and Rinpoche also joined in, and people, kind of looked a bit stunned, and he said, that's made a tendril, a kind of karmic link for those people, and they happen to be their pet dog walking across as well. So it made we have a word called tendril. So sometimes these subtle things have a great benefit. When you're in the company of someone dying, to be able to say this mantra at that time will be of great benefit. And also after the time of death, it will be of great benefit. And to even put that further, I was thinking how wonderful it would be if you came into the world with such a mantra and such a beautiful vibration of loving kindness to take birth into such a realm. So we can see that the mantra has special powers of closing the 6 doors of taking rebirth in unfavorable situations where we can't have all the right conditions for enlightenment. So therefore, this mantra is incredibly powerful during the Bardo stages, which we'll cover later on in the practice. I just want to talk about one little thing I just remembered. I was asked to do a ceremony for a lady. She was a Buddhist practitioner. Her son contacted me and asked me, would I do a practice for her? And I said, what's the rest of the family like to do such a service for her? And they said they're Catholic. Well, I said, oh, look, I don't think I'm really the right person to do something like that. Maybe we could do something like more intimate. And he said, no, I want it to be a ceremony. And she asked, this was her wishes. And I, as her son, I would like to carry them through. So I agreed. I was quite nervous. And I came along and I thought, let's do the Shinrezig mantra, talked a little bit about the visualization, talked about the loving kindness and the potency of the mantra, how it removes fear, how it brings so much blessing because it's been blessed by so many Buddhas of the past. And fortunately, even though these people were Catholic, I think somehow having a kind of ritual element with it, or I rang a few bells and lit candles and created an atmosphere. And that's something that was very, very interesting for me, because later after the service, quite a lot of the people came up and said, that was wonderful. We felt really comfortable. And the mantra, we understood that the mantra simply means compassion, a compassion that doesn't judge, a compassion that's kind of embraces everything, and empathy, somewhere, a compassion that exchanges ourselves with others, something that we really can all relate to. So I don't want to go on too much longer, but it will produce a lot of confidence during the time of death. And now also start practicing, getting familiar with this mantra, and the mantra will give us much release from our afflictions. I can't say enough about this mantra, actually. It's really incredible. All the Buddhist mantras are, and they all have a slightly different purpose, but ultimately it's wisdom and compassion. And here we're talking about compassion that soothes us during our process of dying and also taking rebirth and through the Bardo. Thank you.
Thank you, Janship. And we'll now continue with the book. Rinpoche goes on to say, so as a preparation for the moment of your own death, why not start chanting Om Mani Padme Hung now? If you wish, you can suggest this method to anyone who also wants to prepare themselves for death. It really helps. So we're going to try this now for a few minutes. We're going to invite you all to join us in chanting Om Mani Padme Hum, led by Annie Zangma.
I'm putting my timer on so I don't go over.
Annie Zangma?
Yes, you can hear me? Yep. You can hear me okay, someone? Yes, thank you. Thanks, Ben.
Yes.
See you. Okay. Om Mani Padme Hum. 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 Om Mani Padme Om Mani Padme Hum. I've also used that mantra at a memorial service and a funeral service for 2 Buddhists, and none of the participants were Buddhist. It was only the people who had passed. So I printed out the mantra so everyone had it there for themselves, and they gave it back at the end. And as Jungtup said, just talked a little bit about what the mantra meant and why it was significant to that person, with the focus being on compassion. And then just gave them permission to either join the chanting, or if they, weren't comfortable reciting something like that, to be wishing the people well, to be wishing their friend well in whatever way that works for them as we were chanting. And it was really, really wonderful. It worked well. That's it from me.
Thank you, Annie Sangma. Thank you. So we'll now return to the book. Now Rinpoche now asks, what makes the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra so powerful The cause of all our pain and suffering in this human existence is not knowing that life and death are illusions, or to put it another way, that the bardos of life and death are mere projections. We imagine that everything we see and experience truly exists. Then we misinterpret our perceptions, and as a result, we suffer. The 6 syllables of Om Mani Padme Hum are directly connected with the 6 doors of projection, and it is through these 6 doors that we create the projections that make up the illusions of life, death, and the bardos. I'd just like to share with you a quote from Heart Treasure of the Enlightened Ones by Kabji Delka Khensi Rinpoche on the meaning of the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra. There is not a single aspect of the 84,000 sections of the Buddha's teaching that is not contained in Avalokiteshvara Shenrezig's 6-syllable mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. And as such, the qualities of the Mani are praised again and again in the sutras and the tantras. Whether happy or sad, if we take the Mani as our refuge, Shenrezig will never forsake us. Spontaneous devotion will arise in our minds, and the great vehicle will be effortlessly realized. I'm now going to hand over to Jakob for further explanation on what makes the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra so powerful, especially in relation to our next topic, what is Bardo? Thank you, Jakob.
Thank you, Tsering. We're looking at something here which definitely is of tremendous importance. And I think, as we've just heard, this mantra has so much value. And when we come across the traditions in which this mantra is common, there's so much beauty and so much power, so much goodness that's imbued in this mantra. For the modern person, it's, of course, I think undoubtedly many people, they would come to ceremonial services and they would find this very moving that there are some Buddhists chanting this. And of course, you would be polite and you would say, oh, this is really wonderful. This is so nice and so forth. But for modern people, very difficult to understand. And of course, we could say, if you can open yourself up to the mantra, this is really valuable. It works. But for the modern person who's been brought up from we were very young with a very critical attitude, it would probably be worthwhile if we presently began to familiarize ourselves a little bit with the meaning or the idea of, if we're giving, you could say, the Buddhists the benefit of the doubt, we say, okay, they say this mantra is so important. Why is it that the mantra is so important? And so someone's saying, spotlight yourself. I think I am spotlighted. Yeah, I am spotlighted. Yeah. So that's where it's important to understand that in the Buddhist teaching, it's not just that we say, oh, this is wonderful, please believe, but there is actually a science behind it. But again, this is where we need to acknowledge, and also for us to understand what we're going to be talking about now, Bardo, the whole idea of rebirth and so on, is that in the Buddhist teaching, we understand that what is the most basic component of our reality. Text is on the only thing on the screen, really? Okay, I'm going to stop the share then. All right. Okay, good now? Yeah. All right. So the most, you could say, basic component or the most fundamental aspect of our experience, you could say the most empirical dimension of our entire existence is actually the experience of consciousness. And so in the Buddhist teaching, we operate with something as direct as the presence of consciousness as the most fundamental ingredient basic to our entire existence. And that's why we understand mind can go into a place of deep confusion, which we call samsara. It can go into a place of freedom from this confusion. And of course, what we've been talking about here in terms of meditation and so forth is all about eliminating confusion. But the basic premise of all the Buddhist teaching is that essentially confusion is superficial, and our basic nature is uncontaminated by confusion. And in the general Buddhist vehicle, we unveil this nature through an understanding of how our delusions operate, how we get ourselves into delusion, and then we eliminate this confusion through the practice of meditation. And Ben was giving some very good, very practical indications of how we practically approach and understand the nature of meditation, how it is what eliminates confusion. But we also understand that this nature of purity, this nature of lack of confusion, it permeates not just the mind, but also our body and the entire universe. And that's where in the Vajrayana teaching, we connect with our phenomenal world as never moving actually from this purity. And that's where we can connect with an abiding condition already presently. And this is where we would talk about the teachings of yoga, where we can begin to align ourselves with a dimension of already existing goodness. That is the subject of the Vajrayana, and it's no different from the other Buddhist traditions. It simply engages the dimensions of our physical dimension and also the subtle dimensions of our speech. Sometimes when people, they would come across, you know, in the old days when the people came across people practicing yoga, it was a bit of a joke. And there was sort of the idea that, oh yeah, well, that's something people do in India. You know, you sit in strange postures. I guess that's the sort of colonialist attitude was, well, maybe these people like to sit in strange postures. That's sort of an Indian thing. But of course, nowadays we know that sitting in these postures enable us to align ourselves with a dimension of our physical well-being. It simply comes from a greater science that understands the dimensions of our physicality. So that's where we can understand yoga not as something that's sort of a random, strange practice, but something that really actually has verifiable empirical value. The same applies to also energy. We would say that the old sages in India, they had a practice called nada yoga, where they would actually listen to the sounds of the universe. And it's on the basis of this that we have the Sanskrit alphabet, where we actually would say the Sanskrit alphabet is not created the way you could say ordinary language is created in terms of just the way that people think or how they felt, or, you know, we could say from our ordinary dispositions, but rather the Sanskrit alphabet is a sacred language that really comes from the sages that could hear, you could say, the original pure sounds of the universe and the pure sounds of the body. And it's from that place then also that we have a yoga of chanting Sanskrit syllables as something that connects with a basic purity that is innate to our body. In the Buddhist tradition, we talk about this purity that abides, you could say, in the phenomenal world and within our existence, that which is untainted by our subjective confusion, as Buddha nature. And the Vajrayana is what connects, it's the yoga that connects us with this purity. So when we, in the Buddhist teaching, we approach this, you could say, vision of purity, what we call pure perception. That's where we begin to connect with a trust in the goodness that's basic to ourselves and a goodness that's basic to others. And so when we're visualizing deities, when we're chanting mantras, we're not imagining something that has no basis in, you could say, which is just imagination. It's also not something cultural. I remember once somebody, the first time I was in Dharamsala in 1975, and I met up with this person who had just attended a Buddhist retreat where the Buddhist teacher had said, oh yeah, these Tibetans, what they're chanting there, Om Mani Padme Hum, they might as well be chanting Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola. And there you can see, even in the Buddhist tradition, there's not really an understanding of actually, you could say this path of integrating our perceptions, integrating the purity that permeates our bodily dimension and also the phenomenal world and also sound. And that's where the Vajrayana is particularly profound, in that it engages the physical, it engages the dimensions of sound. But of course, we're not talking about something just cultural or random here. It comes from a profound insight, from genuine vipassana, genuine wisdom that understands the abiding purity that is basic to our reality. And so when we chant the mantras of Mani Padme Hum, when we visualize deity, we're connecting with this abiding purity that's intrinsic to every living being. Those of us who have others for whom who we view as significant others, who we love or who we're very open to, we very often, we would, even when these people act in strange neurotic ways, we would know that they, underneath the sort of neurotic action, there's a dimension of their person which is pure and free from this kind of, you could say, confused actions. Like when people are aggressive, then if we know them and we care for them, we'll say, oh, well, you know, he had an aggressive, or she had an aggressive moment, but they're basically good people. And that's because we're open, and because we have this understanding of how, yes, confusion and the way that we act and so on, it passes. And we understand that the basic stuff, the basic disposition that's innate to the other person is essentially pure. And the Buddha's vision and the vision of the sage is understanding the purity that's basic to every living being. And that's where we can recognize Buddha in others. And we can also recognize the purity that exists in ourselves, in others. And that is what we do when we're practicing deity or pure perception. When we recognize the purity intrinsic to ourselves and recognize the purity in others. And the way that on one hand, we just heard Changchup and Anizamo explain how we practice this with visualization, and we practice this with chanting. And, you know, it's interesting. And just like Changchup and Anizamo were saying, you know, even people who are not Buddhists, there's tremendous value in this, because it's like even people, they don't believe in yoga. If they actually practice yoga, they will actually feel the benefit. Okay, I'm getting a message. My internet connection is unstable. Anyway, I hope you can still hear me. So that's why we could say this works. But of course, it's very helpful if we also have this understanding of how confusion is something that's passing. If we understand, like Rinpoche is saying, you know, it does require a fair amount of, we could study the Buddhist teaching, and there is a lot to be learned. And for the modern person who doesn't have time, yes, better just to chant the mantra. But again, it does require that the modern person dispenses their normal, skeptical, critical thinking for a while. And that's where perhaps the modern person might need to actually educate themselves a little bit with regards to the science and the nature of this practice. And that would generate a profound faith and trust in the practice. But of course, if you have that mind of just being open to the nature of it, sure, that's great. But even so, I would say very often we live in a critical society, so it's always good for us to at least be able to explain what it is that we're doing with the mantra path. But anyway, with regards to the practice of chanting Om Mani Padme Hum, we need to understand that it is like a yoga practice that connects us with an abiding purity. And understanding that you can say the constructions that normally hold us in confusion, they are penetrated. They are, you could say, diminished, and you could say weakened by such yoga practice, the chanting of mantra. Just like if we're not well and we practice physical yoga, then it has a strong impact. There's a lot to be said about this, but anyway, this is just sort of a possibly, you could say, a helpless attempt to just try to at least say, even those who have a hard time understanding this, to really understand there is actually, you could say, a solid empirical, logical foundations for this, like everything there is in the Buddhist teaching. And of course, I say this because having lived among Buddhists for many years, I'm also aware of so many non-Buddhists who have a really hard time understanding what it is Vajrayana is about. And so it's very important that there's transparency and clarity around these practices. But anyway, like we were just saying, even so, without even having the faith or the, you could say, connection, yes, everybody will feel good when this is practiced. And of course, when we talk about somebody who has passed on, then it definitely helps them. When we're practicing to the best of our ability, it has a profound impact. And of course, prior to passing away, this is also something that has such an incredible effect. I'd also say from my own sort of pedestrian practice of the path, I would say chanting mantras has such a profound effect, even when you don't feel spiritual, or if you feel depressed, or however you might feel, you could say not inclined to meditate. Mantras is something that just by this pure magical dimension of sort of operating at the level of energy, which is sort of at the place between the body and the mind, has an incredible impact to our impact on our mind and our well-being. Anyway, to just then go on to the next section here, which is the section on Rinpoche explaining a little bit about Bardo. This again comes back to, of course, the primacy of mind. And when we would essentially define our existence, we would say our existence is really defined in terms of spaces. We move from one space to the next. We have spaces that are, you could say, throughout the day, we experience various kinds of moods and move from one place to the next and so forth. We're continually in between. And the beauty of the Buddhist teaching is that underneath our ordinary confused projections, there is a space that is pure and uncontaminated by confusion. And that is what the Bardo teachings are about. That is, whenever we are in a space, there's an underlying clarity that is uncontaminated by all the various phenomena that we go through. And the entire Buddhist path, the practice of meditation, the practice of shamatha and vipassana, the practice of mantra, and whatever we might do, is something that goes beyond the ordinary habitual patterns that hold us in suffering. And that's where the teaching of Bardo is understanding that all these apparent continuities of confusion and suffering, actually, they exist in terms of just a succession, but at the same time, at any time, the underlying clarity, the underlying openness is something that we could connect with at any time. If we're willing to face or be present and extract ourselves from our ordinary fascination with whatever is arising, whatever we're experiencing, that we could possibly, you could say, step out of this ordinary entanglement. So Rinpoche here says then, what is Bardo? Bardo is a Tibetan word that means in between, and is sometimes translated as intermediate state. To put it very simply, a Bardo is what lies in between two illusory boundaries. So these illusory boundaries are the ways that we think of our reference points. The practice of Bardo is the vipassana that relinquishes our ordinary references points. So Rinpoche says, for example, this very moment lies between the boundaries of the past and future. In other words, today lies between yesterday and tomorrow. At the same time, we must always remember that everything is an illusion, including the Bardos, so that there are no truly existing borders dividing the past from the present or the present from the future. This, Rinpoche says, is very important. As a modern person who was not brought up a Buddhist, I would say this here is not easily understood, but it is, again, something that is very important for us. And it's very helpful if we practice meditation. This begins to make sense. This is not really something that we would be able to understand unless we actually begin to have that introspection that begins to look at the processes that rule our experiences. And that's where the practice of meditation is really essential for us to begin to have some intuition of what is talked about here. But that is where we can begin to see that we're not always, or we're not obliged to continue our confusion and our fixation on our projections the way that we ordinarily are entangled. Rinpoche says one of the most significant and profound of all bardos lies between the beginning of the period during which we are completely unaware of the existence of our inherent Buddha nature and the moment we awaken to it, which Buddhists then describe as enlightenment. So this is one bardo. This is from the moment that we fell into confusion and to the moment that we are completely free. That could be understood as a bardo. In other words, everything that happens in between not recognizing and recognizing Buddha nature is called a bardo. Within this vast bardo are myriad smaller bardos, including the bardo of this life. This bardo is crucially important to ordinary people like us because it is where we have most opportunity to choose or change our direction. And this is again where we extract ourselves from the determinism that we very often are brought up with, saying, well, I can't do much about my situation. This is just how it is. Life is like that. And that's where we're sort of, you'd say, invoking.
No sound.
Jakob, you seem to have lost your internet connection again. There's no sound.
Okay, how is it now? How is it now?
Yes, it's good now. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry about that. So anyway, so that's where so anyway, we have here from Rinpoche then where it says, the 6 doors of projection create our experience of each of the 6 realms. And again, this is where the way that we construct confusion on the basis of our kleshas, on the basis of our toxic subjectivities, where we get caught up in aggression or aversion or attachment, desire. We center on ourselves, and there's the way that we react to our circumstances. And these reactive patterns, they can be very peaceful, pleasant, or they can be very aggressive and painful. And this is where we talk about the various realms of samsara, the 6 realms. And that's where we end up projecting, or rather propelling ourselves into these styles of confusion. So this is what we refer to in the Buddhist teaching as the 6 realms. Rinpoche says projections and experiences caused by desire and need lead to the human realm. Pride leads to the God realm. Jealousy leads to the Asura realm. Confusion and lack of awareness lead to the animal realm. Miserliness and greed lead to the Preta realm. The realm of the hungry ghosts and anger leads to the hell realm. While we are alive, human beings continually experience each of these projections and therefore don't need to imagine what rebirth in the other realms might be like. So that's where in the present life, we can actually experience the psychological dimensions that become then the causes of these actual, you could say, realms and rebirths. So that's where we can presently identify in terms of our own experience, how we create various realms. So now I'd like to go to then Rinpoche's, let's see here. So we have, in general, we talk about 4 or 6 bardos. we generally would classify 4 bardos as being the bardo, what we call the natural bardo of this life. And that's what Rinpoche was just referring to. And that's where we can see how within this present life, we can both understand how confusion plays out, the various experiences that our present confusion can manifest in terms of our experience of ourselves and the world, which Rinpoche was referring to as the 6 realms. And we can also understand how we can begin to diminish the cause of confusion, which is the delusion and the confusion that fixates and fails to see beyond our projections and continually operates with a very, you could say, ignorant or rather unaware assumptions about the solidity of self and other. And that's where we need to look into that. We need to look into that assumption and challenge that assumption. But that is where we can begin to discover a dimension of freedom, which particularly is facilitated through the practice of meditation. So that's you could say the bardo of this life and the possibilities that this life holds for us. What we then speak about is 3 further bardos, which is the bardo of the moment that we're dying, and that's where we're going to look at here. Then we talk about the bardo of Dharma Tao, the bardo of actual reality, and that is once we've passed through the bardo of dying, where there is, and the thing about the bardos is there's always, the teaching of the bardo is that there's always the possibility of liberation. And the thing is our death holds the possibility of liberation, particularly if we've trained in this life. If we have some confidence and thorough realization of the abiding purity of our own mind, if we have that experience and realization. Otherwise, then we go on to what we call the bardo of actual reality, where basically all the content of reality plays out in a very big way. And that is where we talk about the overwhelming nature of that. And that is where we will then seek to find safety. And that is again where we then enter into a place where we try to find reference point, try to find a place where we could be safe. And that's what leads us to the final bardo, which is the bardo of becoming. And that's where then that leads to another lifetime. So in this way, the bardos, they essentially are ways of understanding how we wander. But the implication is, and why this is useful information for us, is that we could liberate ourselves. So Rinpoche says, the process of dying and death itself are a little like dreaming. Whether a dream is good or bad, once you know you are dreaming, you're no longer shackled to the belief that what is happening is real. Once you are free from ignorance and delusion, you no longer have to suffer emotions like hope and fear, desire and anger, pride and insecurity. So this, of course, is the possibility that we could extract ourselves from the ordinary condition, the ordinary confusion. Rinpoche says, while you are alive, you experience the world through your 5 senses. You hear a piece of piano music with your ears, and you see a beautiful view with your eyes. These experiences can be habit-forming, and having seen one glorious sunset, you may well continue to enjoy sunsets for the rest of your life. In order to work properly, our 5 senses rely on the elements that make up the human body. The shock of sudden death severely disrupts these elements, and a slow, peaceful death simply wears them out. Either way, once the elements have dissolved and you are dead, your 5 senses no longer function. You will still be able to perceive, but all your perceptions will be naked and unfiltered, instantly changing how you interact with your surroundings. In the same way that we must adapt to the loss of sight or hearing while we are alive, being dead also requires that we make a few adjustments. And that is where the yogi who trains in the bardo welcomes shocking circumstances in this life and invites them in. And to some extent, even great yogis would seek out difficult circumstances, like going to difficult places, simply to train in a place where we no longer are in our comfort zone. So that's where we train in essentially being able to sustain our clarity in the midst of difficult experiences. Rinpoche says, after you die, you will find yourself in a completely alien environment. At this point, if you have never worked with or trained your mind while you were alive, you will most likely experience great fear, mingled with just a little hope. But if you did train your mind, anything from a simple mindfulness practice to the sophisticated mind training techniques described in the tantric texts, the perceptions and projections you experience as you die and the way you monitor your mind will be quite different. A good Buddhist practitioner will probably be able to control every moment of the process of dying and death. Even a mediocre practitioner will be able to apply a certain amount of mindfulness, which in itself can bring considerable relief. Whether you have trained your mind or not, the most important piece of information to remember is that, emphasis, in the Bardos, everything you experience is a projection created by your own mind. Each person's perception of the Bardos will therefore be quite different. And in the same way, just see, sorry, I'm just gonna sometimes. Each person's perceptions of the Bardo will therefore be quite different. And in the same way that we sometimes see long dead friends in our dreams, once we are in the Bardos, we may well bump into people we know. So this insight here, knowing everything that we experience is created by our own mind, this is what we need to train in this life. It's not as if this life is less of a projection than, say, our dreams or the Bardo. This life that we're experiencing now is a projection created by our own mind. That's what we need to train in presently. So Rinpoche says, does karma affect the dying process? Sorry, let me just check. Was I supposed to read this also? Or do we stop there? Let's see, hold on.
I think we stopped there.
We stop there? Okay. Are there any questions? See? We have a few minutes left. If you have any questions, you're very welcome. So just, I'd just like to say before we end, then that we will be returning to explore more deeply chapter 6 and the painful Bardo of dying later in the program. Also, I'd like to announce that Tsongtse Khyentse Rinpoche will be teaching on Bardo, transmitted from Deer Park on Sunday, the 22nd of May, and also Monday, the 23rd of May, and Tuesday, 24th of May. So 3 days of Bardo teachings. So that's where, so this will be coming up. Rinpoche will be teaching that. Then there's a question here. If one recognizes the Bardo as a projection, what is to be done after that recognition takes place? This also applies in this life. If we're entangled within our phenomena, we're very caught. The implication of the recognition of the Bardo is freedom, that there's choice. So that's where we would say someone who has recognition and is liberated in the Bardo then also has the choice where to move, where to go. So that's why we would say somebody who is able to recognize in the Bardo will also be able to determine where they wish to take rebirth. Someone says they're with their father who is deteriorating physically and mentally, so challenging. And that's also where when we are with persons who are dying, it's very important also that we actually practice at that time, that we actually have a presence there, because as their physical and mental capabilities, faculties begin to diminish, there's at the same time also the subtle mind of the individuals that can be quite alert. And so even though they might appear to be, you could say, distant or physically, mentally not clear, they could very well be very intuitive. And that's where we can do a lot when we are with somebody who's dying in terms of our own practice, simply sustaining our own practice or practicing Tonglen. We can practice in ways in which there's, nobody knows that we're practicing, but we can provide so much security and safety simply just by, you could say, projecting and providing an atmosphere of stability, safety with that person. Are we going to cover preparation for death and practice chapters in the book? Definitely. This is what the whole book is about. Very much. But yes, definitely affirmative. Any suggestions how to deal with a staff member diagnosed is terminal cancer? Yes, practice. That we, first of all, that we, if it's required and we can do that, be honest with them. Very often it's very painful for persons who have a terminal diagnosis that they can't really talk about it. And in our culture, very often we lack the language. So I'm taking these questions. I know there are people here like Sangmo, Kirsten, Chant, who have so much experience with this. So I hope it's all right. I'm just answering this. But yes, and then also practice. Sustain that quality of empathy, presence. Not necessarily that we need to preach Buddhism to them, but merely just through our person. I would like to invite some of the others who are very experienced caretakers, if they have anything to say, to please unmute themselves and join in answering. Yeah. Can chanting the mantras also help years after somebody has died? Yes. Well, the thing is, anytime we do anything spiritual and we dedicate it to somebody, it connects with them. So that's why, yes, of course, this person has moved on probably in so many ways, and who knows where. But the thing is, we will provide conditions that in some way or another definitely will have some benefit. So even though it's a small seed that we're providing, and it's not as if, great beings could possibly extract people out of the, negative experiences, but even us doing mantras, doing anything, just a kind thought makes a big difference.
Okay.
And Izangmo, do you have any comments to any of the questions here? No?
No, you're doing a grand job.
All right. Well, I think it's about that time. Once again, thank you so much, all of you, for joining in here. And what you're studying here is something that will have so much benefit for yourself and obviously for the people around. To engage in this, you could say, extremely important knowledge is so valuable for everybody involved with us in our lives. So someone here is making prayers, thanking everyone for their contribution here, and also praying for the spreading of Rinpoche's life and the spreading of Rinpoche's teaching and awakening for everyone. What are the dates of Rinpoche's talks again? So 22nd, 23rd, and 24th of May.
Do you know what time, Jakob?
I don't. But this will be on the website if it's not already there. So yeah, si.org.au, and it will be there. All right. So I guess we'll conclude. Let me just see here. Just a sec. Just a sec. This virtuous accumulation of merit we offer so that all obstacles dissolve. And at that time, at the time of our death, each of us may find ease in dying and swift rebirth in the pure land of great bliss, quickly gaining enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Thank you.
Jakob, I just noticed that Sharma has her hand raised. I'm not sure if that's an accident.
Sharma, speak
if she
up.
wants to speak. She's doing a lot of...
Yes. Sharma, please.
I think it's an accident.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's not as if we don't want to hear from you.
Okay.
Okay. See you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jakob.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
sharing.
Jakob.
Thank you.
Grandma.
Thank you, Jakob. Jakob, thank you, Sharon. Thank